Hello, everybody. I am really honored to be joined by a very successful author and someone I've known for a while now, although I haven't talked to him in close to a decade. Um, his name is James Clear, and he's the author of the best-selling book Atomic Habits. I think most of you have already heard of him, but if you haven't, I'll tell you a little bit about him. He's a writer and a keynote speaker focused on habits, decision making, and continuous improvement. His book Atomic Habits sold over 15 million copies worldwide. It's been translated into more than 60 languages, was the number one best-selling book of 2021 and 2023 on Amazon, and the number one audiobook on Audible. It's an incredibly successful book. You see it in every bookstore, and he's just done so well for himself. So James is also a regular speaker at Fortune 500 companies, and his work has been featured in publications such as Time Magazine, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CBS This Morning, Today Show Australia. He is a masterclass instructor, along with the world's top experts like Serena Williams, Neil Gaiman, Gordon Ramsay. He has a popular newsletter called 321 that he talks about in this podcast episode, just following my introduction here, with more than 3 million subscribers. He is someone who doesn't just research and report on the research of others, but actually tries out these concepts for himself, experiments with building better habits as an entrepreneur, writer, weightlifter. And in the end, his talks that he gives ends up being one part storytelling, one part academic research, and one part personal experiment, forming a colorful blend of inspirational stories, academic science, and hard-earned wisdom. Okay, so that's the introduction of James, in case you needed him introduced. But I also want to say that the podcast, which I've just finished recording, that you're about to listen to, is incredibly valuable. He gives so much wisdom and tips and really valuable insights into what it takes to actually create a valuable best-selling book, what it's like on the other side of that kind of success, what it's like to deal with all of the difficult parts of it, and really we take a deep look into best-selling author, and what his journey was like getting there and what's like afterward, what his life is like now with kids. You're going to love this interview. I certainly did. Please give it a listen. All right. Well, welcome everybody, and welcome to my honored guest, James Clear. James, awesome to have you on here.
Yeah. Hey, Leo. Great to talk to you. And thanks for the opportunity.
And we were chatting just a little before we pressed record here, but you and I have met once in person, and we were introduced actually, I think it was like a decade ago at World
hmm
Domination Summit, WDS in Portland. And we were introduced by a mutual friend who's no longer with us,
mm
Scott Dinsmore. I don't know if you remember him introducing us.
Yeah. Yeah. I can remember where we were at. Scott was such a great guy. I
Mm.
always say, like, the world needs more Scott Dinsmores. It's obviously it's a shame for anyone to pass away young, but like, he was contributing so much. He was doing so much and providing so much positive energy to the world and helping people. And I think about that a lot because Scott and
Mm.
I, probably around the time that you and I met, Leo, Scott and I were doing a monthly call together, and
Mm.
I learned a lot from him. And I always think for my own career, like, what could have been for Scott over the last decade or
Oh
two
yeah,
decades or whatever, and like, the biggest advantage I have is that I got these years, that I got this time that he
that's
didn't
right.
have. And
That's right.
so anyway, hopefully you can make the most of it. And it just, is a reminder to try to love the people that you're around while you're around them and to make the most of the opportunity that you have. But I definitely miss him. And he was a really positive force in the world.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, and thank you for sharing that. Yeah, Scott was a good friend of mine, and I remember how excited he was to for us to meet. He was like, "Oh, you have to meet James. He's amazing," and he started talking you up, and everything he said was true. So
That was
Thank
so
you. Thank
Scott
you,
though.
Scott.
Like he was excited to introduce everybody. You know, he'd like make
That's
you feel
true.
like $1,000,000. That was such a great
That's
quality he
true.
had. But yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for taking a minute to remember him. Um, okay. Well, since we met a decade ago, stuff has happened in your life, in your career. I remember when your book came out, and I was so excited because I knew what a good person you are and how passionate you are about this, how much you really care. And the book came out, and I'm like, that's an amazing title. I know the book's going to be great. I think my name might actually be in it. Um,
Oh yeah, I'm sure you're in it.
yeah.
You were a huge inspiration for me, not only with habits, because you were like kind of the OG habits blogger, but also just with getting started. You know,
Mm,
I don't know what year you started, but you were a couple years before me.
2007. Yeah.
2007. Okay, so
Yeah.
that makes sense because right around 2008 to 2010 is
Hmm.
when I started getting these ideas of, hey, maybe I'll like write and put my stuff out there.
Yeah.
And so you were one of there were three people that I was looking at when I kind of got started as an entrepreneur in 2010. It was you and Chris Gilbo and Trey Ratcliffe, who's a photographer. I was really into
Mm,
photography at the time.
that's
And
cool.
anyway, but yeah, so your fingerprints are all over my work in the
Amazing.
sense that you
I'm
inspired
still
me to
waiting
get
for
started.
my royalty checks, but no, I'm just kidding. So, what I love that. Thank you for that acknowledgement. But I remember when it came out, and I was so excited for you, and then I saw it everywhere, and I'm just like, oh my god, this book has really taken off, and I was just blown away by how much that really resonated with people. I'd love to hear from you just what that's been like as an author to see this book that your baby go out there and then actually like resonate with a lot of people and be spread so widely and have an impact.
Yeah, I mean, the journey of Atomic Habits has been, it's been a wild 5 years since the book has come out, and
I bet.
it's a lot of different things at once. Like on the one hand, it's obviously incredibly gratifying, like it's the best possible outcome that you could hope for, and as a
Right.
writer, you don't have to write a book. Like you could just write in a diary or write a journal, but the
Sure.
reason people write books is because they hope they'll be read. They hope
Mm.
that they'll spread the ideas around and that they'll be useful and helpful to people. And that's for sure, that's the best part of it, is that hearing from readers who have found it useful or feeling like, you know what, I was able to contribute something to my little corner of the universe. And it feels good to contribute and to be useful. And so
I bet.
that part of it has been great.
Yeah.
um, there are also like lots of things that you have to manage with it. There have been plenty of like growing pains, so to speak. Again, it's like the best possible outcome,
Sure.
but like I've had to get so much better at saying no to things. There are more
Mm.
opportunities. I feel like I'm kind of a slow learner in that regard. I'm always like 6 months behind on what I should be saying no to.
Okay.
Um, so that part's been interesting. There's some things that are just like a natural consequence of the scale of the book. Like once millions of people are reading it, I can't answer the emails anymore. I used to,
Right.
for the first 10,000 people that signed up to my newsletter, I sent each of them a message. I'd be getting,
Personal
say, I would
message.
get like, 30 people would subscribe a day or something. And I would send out 30 emails and say, hey, thanks for joining. Like, I'm excited to have you here.
Wow.
And then you get over 10,000, it's hard to do that anymore. But I could still respond to any email that I was sent. So I did that for
Mm.
a while. But then you get into hundreds of thousands of subscribers or millions of books sold, and that starts to get too much. So you're like, well, I can't just spend all day answering emails. So now I'll put that on autoresponder. Um, and I don't, part of me doesn't want to do those things because I
Of
feel like
course.
I'm losing a little bit of a connection with the audience. I don't feel like my antenna for what is resonating with people is like it's not quite as strong of a signal as it used to be.
That makes
Um,
sense.
so, but there are natural consequences of, the growing pains of it. Um, and then
Yeah.
of course, the last thing I'll just mention here is it's unbelievable the doors that a book can open.
Mm.
Things that have nothing to do with books or people that you were never expecting to reach will find it and reach out to you about something. And there are obvious things like a speaking engagement or they want to partner with you on a product. But then there's also just like totally random stuff like a volunteer organization that you never would have gotten involved with, but now, you're part of their silent raffle or you're speaking at their event or,
Oh wow.
whatever. And so there are lots of things like that are really fun and interesting that happen as a byproduct of the book. And
Mm.
I'll see a picture from there'll be a reader in India, or I gave a speech in Dubai or Australia. And, I'm like, this started as a blog. I was just like blogging. And then now all of a sudden someone in India is reading these ideas. Like
Amazing.
so that part of it is always kind of surprising to me. And the scale and reach of it is still somewhat stunning in some ways.
Um, I want to get to habits and things that you would share with people who are in the early stages. But before we get there, I have some follow up questions because that was just so interesting. I think
Mm,
the reason why I'm interested in this is because there are people who want to create something like a book, and they don't know that much about what it's like on the other side of success, like you've had. So I really
mm,
appreciate you sharing that. And so I have a few follow up questions from what you just shared. The first one is about you mentioned speaking engagements, and I'm wondering, like, is your life a lot of speaking engagements and media appearances and travel? What's it like lately?
I think it could be if I really wanted it to be. I try to limit it. I keep my little running joke is that I say I want to do one speech a month. But that's just because it's a very good problem to have again, but it's never been that. It's been, 3 years ago, I did 60 talks. Last year I did 40. This year I'm shooting for 25 to 30. So I'm
Okay.
getting better at limiting it. Um,
Okay.
but there's still a lot. Before I had kids, being on the road wasn't as big of a deal. But now I don't have nearly the appetite to travel like that.
Mm.
And before I had kids, I could stretch them out and turn them into trips and make it something fun. And now it's just harder to do that. And so
How
I
old
will
are your
still do
kids?
some of it. They're very young, 3 and 1.
Oh
Um,
wow. Oh,
so
like keeping you busy
um,
then.
yeah, it's just tough to juggle the heavy travel schedule with that. And
That makes
honestly, like
sense.
I'm not interested in it. Like I want to be with them. So um,
Yeah.
anyway, the talks are definitely part of it. Interviews and media appearances they were a huge part of the first like 2 years of the book. I had 75 interviews come out on launch day.
Oh
So
wow.
I had done those in the like 3 months prior to the book coming out. By the time the book had been out for 6 months, I was closer to like 200 interviews that I had
Oh
done.
my gosh.
And even now I've done like between 250 and 300 over the last, 5 years since the book has come out.
Wow.
And that's a lot of time. And I think it was worth it to, kind of get the book established. Now though I treat it much differently. And so for the last like 2 years, I've just done all the requests come in and we put everybody on a wait list. And
Mm.
then we say, listen, I do interviews 2 weeks a year and we'll email you when the next interview block comes up and we'll get them scheduled. And so I just had blocked off 2 weeks each year for the last 3 years and I did all the interviews then. And then the rest of the time I wasn't doing any.
Cool
And
to hear.
that worked pretty
Yeah.
well. But I actually think I'm moving into a new phase right now where I probably like this will probably be one of the last interviews I do for a while.
Oh wow.
I'm
What an
not
honor.
I'm not saying I'll never do it again, but
Yeah.
I am saying not right now. I
Okay.
think while the kids are young and I want to protect my time a little more, I think I'm probably entering a phase where I'm just not going to be able to do them as much. Um,
Got it. Got it.
so
Well,
yeah. Anyway,
I
I,
got
I don't know. I think you could do a lot of that if you wanted. All these different platforms and podcasts. Like everybody needs content,
sure.
but
Sure.
at some point, it's just how do you want to be spending your time?
Well, I count myself lucky then that you are doing this interview. Um,
Yeah, of course.
cool. So this you talked about this next phase of your life. You've got young kids. You've kind of done all of the like interviews and speaking and travel. Is there anything that you're seeing as next for you as a creator, or is this kind of a period of like fallowness and let kind of things lie for a little bit?
I like having a creative practice. So
Mm.
since the book came out in 2018,
Hmm.
and let me kind of give a little bit of a creative arc for me, what my creative practices look like.
Oh, that'd be
So,
amazing. Yeah.
um, I started out as an entrepreneur in 2010. I tried creating a couple different products. They didn't really go anywhere. I tried a couple different websites. They didn't really stick. And then eventually I kind of fumbled my way into starting jamesclear.com in 2012. Up until that point, I was basically just taking kind of freelance gigs and trying to make ends meet. I moved
Mm.
back into my parents' basement for 11 months at one point and lived there. So it was just kind of, I was trying to figure it out. 2012 to 2015, I had moved back out on my own. I was starting to get some traction with jamesclear.com. And really, the creative practice that kind of launched my career was that I wrote a new article every Monday and Thursday, and I did that for the first 3 years. So it was really that twice a week writing practice that kind of got me established and got the email list growing. By 2015, I had a pretty sizable email list. And so publishers and agents were interested in just kind of their conversations were starting. Have you thought about writing a book? What do you want to do here? And I actually had never intended to be an author. I just wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Mm.
But it did seem like that was kind of the next step. And I had some friends who were a couple years ahead of me and had been authors. And I don't know, it sort of felt right. So I signed the book deal for Atomic Habits in late 2015. The next 3 years I spent writing the book.
Mm.
And then the book came out in 2018. And starting in 2019, the book was starting to take off. And I didn't have as much time for all the reasons that we just kind of mentioned, interviews and speaking and so on.
Right.
And so I was like, I don't think I can keep up this twice a week writing schedule. Like, I just can't, I don't know that I can manage that creative habit and all the other demands.
Sure.
So I had this little question, and sometimes I like to play with this kind of thought experiment, not just for the example I'm about to give, but also other areas of life, which is the question I asked myself at the time is, all right, I can't write twice a week anymore because those articles usually took, the shortest I ever did one in was 8 hours. They
Mm.
usually took about 20 hours per. So I was like,
Wow.
I just don't have 40 hours a week to put into writing these. So is there a way for me to send a newsletter each week, but have it be much less work for me and not even the same value for the readers, but like, could it even be better?
Hmm.
And if you just play that thought experiment and you're like, listen, if you could lay out all the universe of possibilities, if you could potentially imagine every possible outcome, I have to think there's something that you could do that would be both more valuable for the audience and much less time for you. There's got to be some possibility out there. And so I started leaning my head against that problem. And it took me about 9 months to figure out a structure that I felt like, I don't know if this will do it, but it's at least worth trying. And so what I came up with is 321, which is what the newsletter is now. So it's
Mm.
it's three short ideas from me, two quotes from other people, and one question for people to ponder and think about that week. And um, 321 takes me about 2 hours to do each week. Now there is more time that's baked into it because there's a lot of reading and research to find material and stuff. But it takes me about 2 hours to write it. And I didn't have 40 hours to write, but I did have two. Like, I could figure that out. And so I don't know if it's actually a better value than the articles I was writing before, but I do know that a lot of people like it and that it's growing faster than the previous version of the newsletter that I was doing before.
Mm.
So,
Nice.
that maybe that's a little bit of a signal. So
Yeah.
for the last 5 years now, I have written, my creative practice has been writing 321. It comes out every Thursday. And so far, I mean, knock on wood, but so far I haven't missed an issue in 5 years.
Oh,
And
amazing.
that creative practice, those 2 hours of writing each week, I would like to be able to do more. It's great to be able to do more on the weeks that I can. But even when I'm exhausted or tired, when I'm when I'm worn down from the demands of a newborn, or when I've been traveling a lot from speaking, I can still get that issue out. And
Mm.
it does feel really nice to ship something. And so your question about, is this kind of a fallow period or just a different time where maybe you're not creating stuff? I think I like having a creative practice like that. I like having something that I can ship and feel like, you know what, maybe I didn't do that much, but I did something small and I did it as best as I could. And I can feel good about how this week was spent. And then I can wake up, next week and do the same thing. So
Mm.
I try to find things that are like that are little actions I can take each week or each day that feel like they'll accumulate on top of each other, that they'll continue to grow and stack in clever ways. And 321 is my current answer to that.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And there's so much gold in that. So I just really appreciate that answer. Um, you talked about small habits that lead to these big impacts, and I'm curious about the book because that wasn't a small endeavor. Like writing the book and launching it. Can you talk about that creative process for you and like what that was like, what you put into that?
Yeah, it was very difficult. At certain periods, it was really hardest. Definitely the hardest. It is definitely the hardest I have ever worked on a project, and
Hmm.
it was definitely the most difficult project that I have completed. Um, So I would say the first phase of writing the book you consider like the gathering material stage. And that in my case, that didn't just mean like reading stuff and taking notes. I would define the first 3 years of publishing the blog as gathering material, you know. So I was publishing articles every Monday and Thursday, and each one was a potential idea to see will this go over well or not. And by
Right.
the time I got 3 or 4 years in, I had a couple hundred ideas that I had tried, and I could look at that list and say, here are the 25 or here are the 50 that seem to resonate best with people. Like this seems to be my best stuff. And so I took that subset of my best ideas and I said, this is going to be my starting material for the book. And I did run into a problem writing the book, which is when you publish on a blog, things can be kind of like a spider web. Each idea
Mm,
is like a little node in the web,
right.
and you can link to different topics and they can all kind of connect to each other, and it can be sort of messy. But a book isn't like that. A book is linear. You have to go from chapter 1 to chapter 2 to chapter 3, which means you have to make choices. You have to pull
Mm,
all of the nodes out of the web and then lay them down in a line. And the first year of writing the book was basically me trying to figure that out. It was
mm.
trying to read all the best ideas that I had and then figure out where the gaps were, research those new gaps, and then try to get everything laid out in one cohesive line. Um, and
Interesting.
that I don't know how hard that sounds when I'm saying that sentence, but I can tell you in practice it was like very hard for me to do.
Mm,
And there are a bunch of things kind of happening at once there. Like part of the problem is readers don't want to feel lost, and so you need to be able to have a structure, the table of contents or the way the chapters progress, that provides a clear roadmap for people, so they can look at the table of contents and be like, oh, I understand where this book is going to go, and they feel like we're kind of moving along. They don't feel lost along the journey. But then the other problem is people won't read if they get bored. And
mm,
so one of my principles for writing a book is you want to stack the best ideas up front. And so a
mm,
lot of that work in the first year was me trying to figure out, okay, what are my very best ideas? Like, what are the 3 or 4 or 5 things that really sing when people read them? And how can I arrange this book so that those are as early as possible in the outline? And um, I would say the 3 of the big ideas that Atomic Habits hangs around are getting 1% better each day. So this philosophy of continuous improvement and getting 1% better. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. So
mm,
focus on systems over goals. And then every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. So it's this
mm,
emphasis on how your habits shape your identity.
mm.
And all 3 of those ideas are in the first like 35 pages of the book.
Amazing.
They're all in the first like 5,000 words. And my feeling was somebody should be able to, by the time somebody buys your book, they have already crossed so many thresholds. They've probably heard about it like 10 times, or they talked to a friend about it or whatever. They finally bought it on Amazon, or they went to the bookstore, or, it made it into their hands. It's probably sat on their desk or at their bedside table for a week or a month or 6 months. And then finally, eventually, they cracked it open. And I'm like, man, if you have made it that far, I don't want you to have to wait to get the best stuff. And
Nice.
so, um, my feeling is if somebody only reads one chapter of Atomic Habits, it should be so good that you think, man, I have to tell somebody about this. Like, I don't even
Mm,
need to finish the book. I got to tell you about it now. And who knows if I actually hit that mark or not, but that was a
that's
lot of the
great.
work of the first year, was trying to figure out how do I give people as much value as possible as quickly as possible. Um,
Amazing.
so after the framework is set, after you got the order down, well, now it comes down to a lot of the writing. And I would say writing a book it was for me at least a very different process than writing an article. Because if you write a blog post or a tweet or something like that and you send it out, you get feedback immediately. I mean,
Mm,
sometimes within a minute, but also you almost always within an hour or so, you're getting emails to the inbox, or people are responding or liking it or commenting. And that feedback is really addictive. I can remember in the first 3 months of starting jamesclear.com. So I didn't have many subscribers. I started at zero. I've got maybe 1,000 subscribers or something. And I sent out an article and there wasn't really much response. But the next day, one guy emailed me and said, I really enjoyed that. And that
Mm.
was enough. I can like still remember that email sitting here now. That was enough to get me to show up again and do it the next day, to do it again
Amazing.
on Thursday. And so that feedback counts for a lot, is my point. And
Yeah,
when you're
I
working
get
on a
that.
book, you don't get any of it. You sit
Mm.
down and you like the manuscript's a mess and you write for 8 hours and then you go to sleep and you wake up the next day and it's exactly the same. It's still a mess. Nobody saw it. Nobody gave you any feedback. And you can do that for a couple days or a week or a month, but once you start getting 6, 7, 8 months in, you're like, what am I doing? I mean, it just feels
Mm.
like you're banging your head against the wall and not getting anywhere. And so I did a couple things. I like eventually I hired an outside editor to give me some feedback and kind of, just tell me what was good or bad about it. But it was still, the lack of feedback was still a very difficult part of writing the book.
Mm.
Um, and then my last phase for what the book was like and how it was different than most of the writing I do is I didn't want to write a book that felt like it should have been shorter. A lot of books are like that where people, the classic, like this book could have been a blog post sort of thing. And so the first draft of Atomic Habits was 700 pages.
Mm.
And the finished version is like 250. So I compressed it by, it's like 1/3 of what it started out as. And my feeling was, well, if one out of every three things I say isn't any good, then I have a real problem. And so but what made it hard to write that is that I was repeating myself a lot and I was kind of saying the same thing in like 3 or 4 different ways. And so I had this 700-page manuscript and it was just a real slog to edit it down. Um, at one point I had, the kind of the framework of Atomic Habits, what the book sort of is built around are these 4 laws of behavior change. And that forms like the main backbone of the book. And for a while I had a longer manuscript that had the 4 laws as part 1. And it had these 5 forces that drive behavior change as part 2.
Mm.
And at some point, one of the editors I was working with, she said, listen, I think you really need to mold or to merge these 5 forces into the 4 laws. And
Mm.
once I got that piece of feedback, that was when the manuscript finally like fell in place.
Amazing.
It needed to be simplified. So I would describe my writing style and also my business style as broad funnel, tight filter. So broad
Mm.
funnel, I'm going to explore a lot of ideas. I'm going to write and generate a lot of ideas. People might look at Atomic Habits and say, wow, there's so many great insights in here. And I would say you would never say that if you saw how many ideas I had to come up with to get those. Like my strategy is basically generate 1,000 ideas, cut 950 of them, and then you only keep the best 50 that are there and it looks really polished at the end of it. But the
Mm.
process of generating that, like you have to create a lot of junk along the way. And
So you're
that
tossing out
sounds fairly
95%.
simple to say, but it can be kind of brutal to, to have to do it
Mm.
day after day.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for sharing all of that. Lots of value there as well. Um, One thing I'm curious about, you described three different places where there was like a slog. Like there was
Yeah.
like, putting everything in order, all these spiderweb nodes into order. That took like a year. And then like doing all the writing, 700 pages without any feedback
Yeah.
sounded pretty hard. And then taking that and compressing it, you said was really hard. And I'm wondering like how you dealt with that kind of like discouraging slog, how you kept yourself going to actually finish it.
It's funny. I had some stuff that like told myself at the time, like one of my rewards I told myself, I said, when I finish this book, I'm going to buy a leather jacket. Um,
Okay.
and I don't know why I picked that. Cause like, I don't even really care that much about clothes. But that was just something that I didn't have. And it sounded like some little reward I would give myself. And what's funny looking back on it is I kind of knew even in the moment that I didn't really care about the jacket, but
Mm.
it was just part of the story that I could tell myself. Um, what's funny is once the book was finished, I didn't even want to buy the jacket. I just, I like the real reward was finishing the book, but I don't know. I just mentioned that as a, but maybe that's a potentially useful psychological thing to do with yourself to like
Mm.
have a story about, what you're going to reward yourself with. Um, the real answer though, is that I was driven by this vision of what I thought the book could be, or what I thought I could create. And there was a gap between where I thought I could go and what I thought I could produce and where I was right then.
Mm.
And I was driven to close that gap. And sometimes the way that I think about it is like, it's kind of like driving a car, and you can see a mountain in the distance, and the valley in front of you is like filled with fog, and you don't really know what the path is or how you're going to end up there, but you can see far enough ahead of you to know that you're kind of progressing or making progress toward that. And that was basically how I kind of stumbled through the process. I didn't even know what I needed to do or what would be required to finish the book. I couldn't tell you all the steps and just say, well, I'm going to follow this roadmap and this will get me, to a finished book. But I could see the vision in my mind of what I wanted
Mm.
it to be, and I could see where I was at and what the next step was. And so I just kept taking the next
Mm.
step and kept progressing slowly that way. Um,
I love that.
and then I also got had a lot of feedback from the people that love me and that are in my life, so my
Mm.
parents, my wife, um, they played a big role in it. Not,
Mm.
they none of them wrote the book, but they were there for me when I was writing it.
Mm.
And I think that was helpful too. Like there were plenty of days where you just feel like, you haven't really made any progress, but they were still there and they still loved you. So, you
Mm.
could show up again the next day. And then the last thing I would say is working out. Exercise doesn't seem like it has anything to do with writing a book, but for me, there were a lot of days where you feel like, well, this book was a total mess, but at least I got a good workout in. And that made the day not feel like a waste.
Mm.
And
I love
sometimes
that.
having a day where you feel like, well, I didn't waste the day, even though the book didn't move forward. Now you can show up again the next day and get back to work on it.
Mm. So that's all amazing stuff. One thing, the first thing that you shared, the mountain, like just having that in your vision, like it really felt like you had this clear vision and a purpose, and it wasn't so easy to get there, and wasn't so clear how to get there, but you were committed to that. And I'm wondering, like, why that vision was so important to you, that you were committed to moving through all of the slog. Like, what did you really care about there?
At one point when I was writing the book, I told my wife, I said, I think this might need to be a book about all of behavior change. And she was like,
Mm.
okay, just slow down a little bit. Like,
Settle down.
I think you're expanding the scope, a little too much. Um, but what I was trying to get at is that, I was trying to write the best book on habits that have been written. And I think for most areas of life, let's say 98% of the things that you do, doing it just good enough is probably fine.
Mm.
Like you don't need to strive in that way for most things in life. It's probably fine. Um, but there are a few things that really are worth the effort, that really are important to you, whatever it is to you. Like different people optimize for different things. But there are a couple things in your life that probably are worth giving your best effort on. And for those few things, I feel like the only standard that makes any sense for me as a creator is to try to do it the best that it's ever been done.
Mm.
And that doesn't mean that you'll actually hit that mark, but I think that's the only mark worth reaching for. Like,
Mm.
you'll never stumble into that result. You're never going to just like be like, well, I wanted to write a book and it just turned out that it was the best book on that topic. Like it's never just going to be an accident. You have to at least strive to reach that standard. And honestly, I don't know if Atomic Habits hits that standard. And frankly, it's not for me to decide. Like it's up to the readers to decide whether it's, the best book on habits or not. But I do know that I tried to make it the best. And I know
Mm.
that I was striving and reaching for that. And there was something very captivating about that standard and about that vision
Mm.
for me. And so um, it's easier for me to get motivated about something that's that big. I would
Mm.
show up that day and be like, how can I make this the best that's ever been done on this topic? What does that require? Where are all the holes? What have the previous books not done? What does the audience need that they haven't had addressed yet? What am I missing? What's a weak point for me that I haven't talked about yet? What is the object of the reader's desire? That's a big question I came back to a lot. The
Mm.
object of the reader's desire for me was to either build good habits or break bad ones. And so for every sentence, I could come back to that question as a test and say, does this sentence help people get closer to building good habits or breaking bad ones? If it does, then I'll keep it in the manuscript. If it doesn't, it needs to get cut.
Mm,
And that having that standard, having that quality bar, whether I hit it or not, that was the thing that was motivating and driving me forward.
amazing. You don't hear a lot of people talking about a standard that high, and so to hear someone like you to say that like that's what you were driven by, and you know who knows if you've it's not for me either to say if you've achieved it, but you definitely um, you could make a claim that you have. Like
The thing
it
is,
got to a
it
high
kind of
standard.
doesn't matter if it is or not.
Right.
What matters is striving for it.
Right.
What matters is not whether you win or lose. What matters is that you're reaching. And
Mm,
that's what I wanted, and that was the project that made sense for me to do that on. And again, I don't think it makes sense to do that in most areas of life. But you probably only get, I mean, if you're lucky, you got 80 or 90, maybe 100 years on this earth, and you're a kid for some of it, and maybe your health is kind of failing for some of it. I mean, if these big projects take a decade or something to do, how many of these do you get in your life? Five,
mm,
six? Like you don't get that many times in your life when you can strive for something that big. And this was one of mine. And I feel like if I was going to spend the time on it, I wanted it to be as good as it could.
I love that. Um, there's you've mentioned feedback a few times. What I've noticed though in the people that I'm talking to who are creating stuff is in the early stages is that they are afraid of getting feedback. Like the
Mm,
good feedback is amazing, but they're like, I don't want to put this out there because I might, get criticized.
yeah.
And then perfectionism kicks in where they want to make it perfect so that it can never get criticized. And I'm wondering for you, it sounds like you have a different relationship to feedback. I'm wondering if there's like a mindset around feedback that has helped you, or even a habit that's like helped you to like get over that.
There are definitely some mindsets that I try to hold or practice. I don't always get it right, but there are definitely some I try to keep in mind. One little saying that I remind myself of is you can choose the trade-off. You can either be ignored or you can be criticized. So you can either keep your work to yourself and not share it, and then it'll be ignored because it's not out in the world, or you can share it and try to benefit other people and get the ideas out there, and you'll encounter some criticism. But
Mm,
those are your two options. Would you rather be ignored, or would you rather be criticized? And I would rather deal with some criticism and try to produce something that's useful. Um,
mm,
I also generally, and this is just something I try to remind myself of when I have the tough days and see criticism that I don't like, or that it starts to worm its way into your mind too much, or you're ruminating on it, which is critics can't exist without creators. The creators
mm,
can exist on their own. They can just make stuff, but the critics need something to criticize.
mm,
And so I would rather spend my time building stuff up than tearing things down. Like it's so much more fun to feed the creative energy and to build something than it is to destroy something. And
mm,
so if I'm just looking at like, how do I want to be spending my life? I'd rather be spending my life creating things than consuming or criticizing them.
mm,
Um, the other mindset that I have is like fear can be a gas pedal or it can be a brake. So, sometimes what you're describing, and I have felt it too, and many creators feel it, is you're worried about how the work will be received, or you're worried about what the feedback will look like. And so fear becomes this brake. It stops you from shipping the book.
mm,
In my case, what I try to practice is I want fear to be the gas pedal, not the brake. In other words,
mm,
I'm terrified of how the audience will respond to it. Like I definitely want them to enjoy the work, but I am so scared of it that it motivates me to work harder and to make sure that the work is as good as it could possibly be. Because if I'm going to be putting it out there and a lot of people are going to be reading it, I want to make sure that it's worth their time.
mm,
And so it becomes the fear becomes an accelerant for doing better creative work, or for achieving a higher standard, rather than from talking myself out of putting it out there in
mm.
the first place. Um, so those are just some mindsets that I have. More
Sure.
practically speaking, I have noticed that having a schedule for shipping has been a really helpful thing for me. And for those first couple years, it was write a new article every Monday and Thursday. More recently, it's been ship 321 every Thursday. But it's helpful for me to have a deadline, for me to have a schedule and say, listen, something's getting out on this day. And the little phrase that I try to keep in mind is reduce the scope, but stick to the schedule.
Mm.
So not every article that I wrote for those first 3 years, not every Monday and Thursday was the same word count. Sometimes I didn't have 2,000 good words in me. Maybe all I had was 800, but reduce the scope, but stick to the schedule. And if this is the only, if the only great thing that you can write that day is a paragraph, then ship that paragraph. And so, um, I want to keep the quality bar high. I don't want to just like be publishing a lot of words to publish a lot of words, but I also don't want to use perfectionism as an excuse for not publishing. So the
Mm.
thing that I adjust on is the scope. If I
Mm.
can only write one good sentence, then that's what's getting shipped, but something's getting out there.
I
And
love it.
that's so that those are some of my strategies for dealing with the resistance that you feel as a creator.
Yeah. One thing I really getting about you, like through all of these answers, is just the commitment that you are. Like if I've committed to shipping on these days, that's happening. Even if it's just one
Mhm.
sentence. I just really appreciate that the way that you show up with that kind of commitment in the world. It's an incredible model.
Yeah, thank
Um,
you. It's interesting because sometimes I feel like I like I don't like I don't know, like I need to do a better job with that. But I do. I
sure.
think it's because the in between days, um well, there are a couple things going on. First, one lesson to take away from this is that writing is hard for everybody. There
Mm.
are no writers who are like, oh, it's just so easy to write. Um, and in a way, that is what makes the writing useful is the fact that it
Mm.
is hard. Like complaining about writing being hard is kind of like complaining about the weights being heavy at the gym. Like the reason that the weights make you stronger is because
Yeah.
they weigh something. And the
Right.
reason that the writing improves your ideas and the quality of your thinking is because it requires you to think hard and it's a little bit difficult to do. And
Mm.
so it's actually the resistance provided either by the barbell or by the writing process that leads to the stronger outcome. Um,
Mm.
and that that is something that I still feel now, even if I do a good job of shipping on a regular cadence.
Mm. I love that. Um, okay. Well, I'd like to wrap up maybe with one or two more questions.
Sure.
One question is there's a lot of people listening to this or watching this uh, there where you were, more than a decade ago. And so if you could go back and give James Clear some advice, some tips, something that could really help him on this journey, anything other than what you've already shared, because you've shared a lot of really valuable stuff. Anything else that you'd like to share?
Sure. There are a couple things that come to mind. So the first is the topic that you write about is going to make an enormous difference in how large your potential audience is. Habits is a great topic because it applies to everybody. Usually, if you ask somebody, who's your book for? And they say everyone, that's a terrible answer. But in the case of habits, like it is, we all have habits. It's a universal topic. And there are other topics like that too, that are like have a universal appeal or a wide appeal. And I didn't know that I was going to write about habits at the beginning. I wrote about a
Mm,
bunch of stuff early on. And so that would be my first piece of advice is lay out a range of topics that you are genuinely fascinated by and interested in because you do need to be fascinated with it. You can't hack that. You can't just like pick a popular topic that you don't care about. That's not a good recipe for long-term success. Um, but whatever you are genuinely interested in, list out a range of topics like that and then start to explore. Like I wrote about how to have better squat form in the gym. I wrote about the medical system in America. I wrote about habits and creativity. I wrote about decision making and strategy. And eventually, what I realized was when I wrote about habits, that's when people said, "Oh, I want to hear more from you on that. Like that's really interesting." And when I wrote about the other stuff, they were kind of like, "Well, that's nice, but maybe keep it to yourself." Like and so you're looking for that overlap between what you're fascinated by and what the audience wants to hear from you on.
mm,
So explore a range of topics. I think that's my first bit of advice because some
great.
topics have a much higher ceiling than others.
Mm,
Um, the second thing is it is important to have some kind of creative practice, some cadence for shipping. And I don't think there's anything magical about me doing it twice a week in the beginning or once a week now or whatever. The truth is, the best schedule is the one that you can actually stick to. And so you should pick the cadence that feels right for you and your lifestyle. And if you can do that and you ship consistently, you would be surprised what that can add up to in a year or 2 years or 3 years. Like they're just the reality is most people don't stick with it for that long.
Mm.
The little example I like to give is when I started out as a blogger. So the month that I started, there was another guy who was running a really popular fitness site at the time, and I had 0 subscribers, and or 1,000 or whatever, and he had 20,000. Okay, so he's 20 times the size of me. Um, and then if you fast forward a couple years later, I think maybe 4 years later, I was 20 x the size of him.
Wow.
Um, and the reason is just because he stopped writing and I kept
Mm.
writing. That's the only secret,
Mm.
is that his content was great. He was producing really good stuff, but he didn't stick with the habit. And
Mm.
so you want to pick a cadence that you can stick to, because that is actually how you end up winning in the long run. So
Mm.
explore topics, choose something that has like a high upside or a big ceiling. Figure out a cadence that works well for you and that you feel like you can stick to. Um, and then I don't know what I would do if I was starting over again right now. Like sometimes I wonder, like, would I be a blogger or would
Mm.
I be an Instagram influencer or a YouTuber or a podcaster or something? And I don't know. Maybe I just got lucky with the timing on when I got started, because I'm not really interested in those other platforms in the same way. But that is another important thing to ask yourself, is what medium is right for my personality and for my content? Because some
Mm.
stuff just works better in different formats, or some formats may appeal to you more than others. And one thing is true about whatever you end up creating, which is you're always going to run into obstacles and difficulties. Like it's not easy to produce great content for years on end. And
Right.
so, you need to choose the format, the medium, the topic that feels best for you. Because the person who feels like it's fun and who's genuinely interested in it, they'll stick with it when things get a little bit hard. The person who kind of feels like it's a chore and they don't really love producing the show, or they don't really love writing about that topic, as soon as it gets really hard, they're going to give up. And so,
That makes
you want to
sense.
try to position yourself so that you're in a spot where you can stick with it.
Mm. Amazing. By the way, I could see you if you were starting out these days. You'd be a TikToker for sure.
My dance moves,
um,
that's what would get me there.
Last question, and this one could be a quick one. I'm just curious. You're a dad now, and I wonder how that's changed your life. How have these kids impacted you?
It's the best. It's the best. I love it so much. It's the thing in my life that I never knew I wanted until I had it. Like I never knew I wanted it this badly, until I
Mm.
had it. And
Mm.
yeah, it's the best. I don't even know what else to say other than, like, I'm so grateful for them and I'm so happy to be able to spend time with them. And I am glad that I took the years before to set up the business so that I can have a lifestyle now where I get to see them so much. I mean,
Mm.
I saw them 10 minutes before we started this interview. I was hanging out with them at the kitchen table. And
Mm.
so to be able to, like, work, whatever it is I do for work, um, and spend so much time with them each day is just like the ultimate gift. And I'm so happy that I made choices, to build a business that was based around the lifestyle I wanted and not
Mm.
based around just money or career status or something else. And, like, we all need money. There's nothing wrong with earning money, but, I think it can be really easy to make choices that optimize for money and don't optimize for lifestyle. And, there aren't a ton of perfect answers out there, but there are a few that can give you both. And
Mm.
I tried really hard to figure out a set of choices and a set style of business that could give me the lifestyle I wanted while taking care of my financial needs. And yeah, I'm just
Mm.
I'm just glad that I have the time with them now.
Amazing. Well, I'm sure they're lucky to have you as a dad. And thanks for sharing everything you've shared today. This is incredibly valuable for anyone who's starting out or is somewhere along this journey. And I just want to thank you for your time. I know it's limited and it's been a gift. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Leo. Always a pleasure to talk.